Today we are talking about two-step equations, and we're also going to throw in some two-step inequalities. Now this is a lot like yesterday's lesson, it's just that we're adding an extra step. So let's start by looking at some examples. If you'll notice in number 1, we have 6 is equal to a divided by 4 plus 2. Now this time, unlike yesterday when we only had one step, there's actually two different steps. If you think about order of operations, we have a division and we have an addition sign. So I like to kind of drop that line there to separate both sides of the equation. I'm going to keep this balanced. Whatever I do to one side, I'm going to make sure I do the same thing to the other side. Now, here's a general rule about the order in which you solve. When we did order of operations, we had please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, and this was the direction that you would do order of operations in. Well, now that we're solving, we're basically undoing order of operations. So now, since we're trying to undo, we're going to go in the opposite direction. So typically, when you find the term that has your variable in it, you're going to undo whatever is being added or subtracted to that term first. Since adding and subtracting is the last step in order of operations, that would be the first thing that you would undo. Think about when you're getting dressed in the morning. If you put your sock on first, and then you put on your shoe, when you get ready to undo that process, you have to take off the shoe before you can take off the sock. You've got to go in the reverse direction. So since adding this 2 would have been the last step, it's going to be the first thing that I do when I'm reversing the order. So to get rid of adding 2, I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. So that 6 subtract 2 leaves me with a 4. And the plus 2 and the minus 2 cancel, so I'm left with an a divided by 4. Now, to isolate that a, to get that a completely all alone, I've got to get rid of dividing by 4. The way that I undo dividing by 4 is to multiply by 4. And remember, what I do to one side, I got to make sure I do to the other. So this 4 from the top and the 4 from the bottom cancel, because 4 divided by 4 is going to cancel. So I have just a plain old a on that side, and 4 times 4 is a 16, and that is the value of your variable. Okay, let's practice another one. Let's look at number 3. Okay, so I have a 9x minus a 7. That expression is equal to a negative 7. So I like to draw that line there to separate my two sides. And again, when you do not see a symbol there, that means that this is multiplication. So this is like 9 times x subtract a 7. If I'm trying to isolate that term that has the variable in it, the first thing I've got to get rid of is this subtracting 7 from the back. Okay? To get rid of subtracting 7, I've got to add 7. So I'm going to add 7 to that side, and I'm going to add 7 to that side. Now subtracting 7 and adding 7 are opposites, so they're going to cancel. So this first side is just left with 9 times x. And on the other side, negative 7 plus 7 cancels. But now over here, when I canceled this stuff, I didn't actually put a 9x minus 0 because I didn't have to have that. But on this side, since there's nothing left on this side, you're going to have to put the number 0. Negative 7 plus the 7 is a 0. Now we're going to keep right on rolling. Okay, 9 times x, to get rid of multiplying by 9, I'm going to divide both sides by 9. The 9 divided by the 9, that cancels and just leaves me a 1x. And 0 divided by 9 is the number 0. And 0 is a real answer, and that's a perfectly acceptable thing to write. Now, I want us to look at one like number 6. Okay, this time the order in which we would do things in is a little bit different because we have negative 1 on one side, and that is equal or balanced to this fraction. Now, even though there's no parentheses in this numerator, because this fraction bar covers the entire thing, that implies that the 5 plus x is all together. So before I can get rid of this added 5 here, I'm going to have to get rid of this fraction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop my line there so I can clearly see both sides of my expression. And because all of this numerator is together, the first thing I'm going to do is to get rid of dividing by 6. The way that we get rid of dividing is by multiplying. So I'm going to multiply that side by 6. I'm also going to take this 1, I'm going to multiply that side by 6. So -1 times 6 would be a -6 on this side. And the 6 that I'm multiplying by and that 6 that you're dividing by are going to cancel. So when they cancel, I'm left with 5 plus x. Now I can get the x by itself. If I want to isolate this variable right here, I've got to get rid of this 5 that's being added in. So to get rid of adding 5, we subtract 5. Adding 5 and subtracting 5 cancel. All that's left on that second side is an x. And here, a -6 subtract a 5. Remember how we said subtraction is the same thing as adding the opposite? So that's really like a -6 plus a -5, which is a -11. Now folks, I want to show you, I know that this particular worksheet is all equations, but remember we also can do inequalities as well. So I'm going to change number 8. Let's pretend that instead of equal to, that this one is a less than or equal to. And let's just practice this one. So on the first side of our inequality, we have a 2 times the quantity of n plus 5, and this side is less than or equal to the number -2. Okay, I'm still going to do the same process as before. Whatever I do to one side, I'm going to make sure I do to the other side. Now, you've got a couple of options here. You could distribute that 2 to the inside of the parentheses if you want to. Or you could go ahead and get rid of this, because when we see this distributive property here, that implies that you're multiplying by 2. What I could do is, instead of actually doing the distributive property, I could get rid of multiplying by 2 and just go ahead and divide both sides by 2. That way my dividing by 2 and my multiplying by 2 cancel, and I don't have anything to distribute. When these guys cancel, all I'm left with is an n plus 5. And on this side, -2 divided by 2 is a -1. Now folks, I know that the answer on this side here is a -1, but all I did as far as my operation is I divided by a +2. So I am not going to flip my sign. It is still less than or equal to, because I didn't divide or multiply by a negative number. I actually divided by a +2. Now, to get this in all by itself, the last thing I've got to do is get rid of adding this 5. So I'm just going to subtract 5 from both sides. So the +5 and the -5 cancel. So I've got n is less than or equal to the -1 minus the 5. Remember, subtraction is the same thing as adding the opposite. So it's like a -1 and a -5, which give me -6. Because all I was doing was subtracting 5 from both sides, I do not have to flip my sign. You're only going to have to change your sign around if you divide by a negative or multiply by a negative. Okay, so this is a lot like what we were doing yesterday. It's just, instead of having only one step to get the variable by itself, you have 2. Okay.